These days, I always carry a torch in my pocket. I found a small LED one at an electronics store for just a few dollars, and it's surprisingly bright for its size. I even bought 5 of them. One stays with me, while the others are placed strategically around my house, so I can grab one quickly if needed. I'm determined not to be left in the dark again. You see, it's bad enough that I see her every time I close my eyes. I can't bear the thought of seeing her again with my eyes open. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Perhaps it's better to start at the beginning. I used to work in an office building in town, handling public counter services for a government department that shall remain unnamed. The job itself was straightforward, processing applications, providing information about various services, and interacting with the public. Nothing out of the ordinary about the work, or my co-workers, who I got along with just fine. The building, however, was unremarkable at first glance. It was a standard 12-story office building, boxy and plain, blending in with countless others in the city. Built in the 1980s, it was slightly older than the surrounding structures, which meant it had its quirks. Drafts would occasionally sweep through, and the lights had a habit of flickering sporadically. Nothing major, though. Just mild inconveniences. There were 4 elevators, but one always seemed to be out of order. When one was fixed, another would inevitably break down. The electrical system was quirky, causing the elevator doors to slam shut unexpectedly or the cars to drop slightly upon entry. None of this was deemed serious enough to warrant a fix, though it was certainly irritating. Even before everything happened, the lifts gave me an uneasy feeling, so I often opted to take the stairs instead. The building had 2 stairwells, one on each side, both narrow and somewhat confined. The stairwells in the building were narrow, and if you encountered someone heading in the opposite direction, one of you would have to step aside. You'd either wait in the small landing area by the doors to each floor or awkwardly turn sideways to let the other person pass. During evacuations, like for fire alarms, the stairwells could become quite congested. Luckily, my office was on the 3rd floor, so it didn't take me long to get up or down. The stairwells were plain, windowless spaces with cement walls and dim lighting, likely because the building's owners opted for cheap energy, saving bulbs to cut costs. And each stairwell also had a bathroom on every level. One stairwell for men, the other for women. After an incident involving a peeping Tom in the women's bathroom, the building managers installed combination locks on all the restroom doors, limiting access to those who worked in the building. Different floors housed various businesses and departments, and each had its own combination for the bathroom locks. This meant you could only use the restroom on your floor, preventing people from going up or down to use another one. Being part of a government department, security was taken seriously. To access the back office area of my floor, employees needed to swipe their ID cards. The same applied to the stairwell doors. You could exit by pressing a button to release the magnetic lock, but you needed your card to get back in. Even the bathrooms had similar buttons to exit back into the stairwell. It's difficult to say exactly when things started going wrong. It wasn't as if there was a single, defining moment that flipped everything upside down, like someone flicking a light switch. It was more gradual, creeping in like the story of the frog in water. If you drop a frog into boiling water, it jumps out immediately. But put it in cold water and slowly heat it, and the frog doesn't realize it's being boiled alive. That's how it felt. The situation shifted subtly from normal to unsettling before anyone fully grasped what was happening. Looking back, I wish I had recognized the signs earlier and left immediately, but hindsight is always 20/20. There was a noticeable imbalance of men and women working in my office, which often meant I had the men's room to myself, a rare luxury. The first instance of something strange happening was during one of my routine trips to the bathroom. I passed through the reception area, pressed the button to enter the stairwell, and started keying in the code for the men's room door. As the stairwell door closed behind me, a typical automatic hinge door, I felt an unexpected shiver run down my spine. It wasn't just a fleeting chill, the atmosphere shifted. Everything became unnaturally quiet, almost oppressively so. The usual background noise of the radio and conversations from the waiting room disappeared entirely. Normally, you could still hear faint sounds even in the bathroom, but now it was as if I'd stepped into a vacuum. At the time, I didn't dwell on it. I just did what I needed to do quickly and left, feeling uneasy. The strange tension eased as soon as I entered the brightly lit reception area, and everything seemed normal again. Days, maybe even weeks, went by without incident, and I almost forgot about that moment. A few minor things happened here and there. A sudden cold spot, the eerie sensation of being watched, but I brushed it off as stress. Life carried on as usual. I had a great relationship with my colleagues and boss, most of whom were in their mid-20s like me. Occasionally, we'd unwind with post-work drinks on a Friday, blowing off steam after a long week. On one such Friday, after closing up the public counter and finishing for the day, we prepared to head out. I excused myself to use the men's room before leaving. As I entered the stairwell, I immediately noticed something off. The lighting seemed dimmer than usual. The bulb above the flight of stairs leading to the next floor had burned out. Turning to key in the bathroom door code, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. At the top of the stairs, in the gloom, something moved. It was a fleeting, dark shape, darting from the bathroom door at the top of the stairs to the corner leading to the next flight. It moved unnaturally fast, like a scene in a movie played at quadruple speed. I couldn't make out any details. It was just a shadowy figure, but somehow it seemed darker than the dim surroundings, like a void against an already dimly lit backdrop. The movement was somehow the most unnerving part. Despite its incredible speed, it didn't blur or waver. It was more of a scuttle than anything else. I turned away from the bathroom door and froze at the bottom of the stairs, transfixed by the shadows above. I don't know how long I stood there, but I couldn't move, paralyzed by fear. The next thing I knew, a hand clapped down on my shoulder. "Daniel, what are you doing, man?" It was my boss, who had come to see what was taking so long. "Thea, there was something," I stammered, my voice barely working. He looked at me quizzically, raising an eyebrow. "What was it?" I turned to look back up the stairs. The stairwell didn't seem quite as dim as before. Shaking my head, I forced out a reply. "Nothing. Must have been a trick of the light. I've been meaning to get my eyes tested." "Well, let's get out of here and grab some drinks," he said, brushing it off. Later, at the bar, surrounded by my colleagues' laughter and chatter, everything felt normal again. The warmth and brightness of the place banished the lingering unease. The incident in the stairwell seemed distant, and I convinced myself it had been nothing. But if I had known what was coming, I wouldn't have felt so at ease. For a while, things seemed normal. I returned to work after the weekend and focused on my tasks, pushing the memory of what I'd seen, or thought I'd seen, out of my mind. One perk of the job was that the department covered eye tests and new glasses, so I booked an appointment. The optometrist confirmed my eyesight hadn't worsened in 5 years, but recommended a new pair of glasses anyway. About a month after the stairwell incident, I was getting ready to hit the gym after work. I headed to the bathroom to change into my running gear. Most of the lights were already off since the public reception area had closed for the day, but there was still enough daylight outside to see. I used the public bathroom in the waiting area, slipped in my earbuds, and turned up my MP3 player to get pumped for my run. That's when I heard it. A scream. It's hard to describe. It was unmistakably female, but raw and guttural, as if it had been forced out of a throat shredded by razor blades. It was impossibly loud, yet it seemed distant, as though it came from miles away. Startled, I yanked out my earbuds, unlocked the door, and bolted into the waiting room, fully expecting to stumble upon a violent scene. But the room was empty, completely deserted. I scanned the room, listening intently, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. My pulse hammered in my ears. Then I turned back toward the bathroom. In the mirror, I saw my reflection and something else. There was a dark shape looming over my shoulder. Heart pounding, I spun around, bracing myself for whatever it was, but there was nothing. Slowly, I turned back to the mirror. But whatever had been there a moment ago had vanished. My hands were trembling as I fumbled for my swipe access card. Hastily using it to unlock the door to the back office, I rushed in where my boss was packing up at his desk. "Did you hear that?" I nearly shouted, anxiety in my voice. He looked up, visibly confused. "What?" "I heard someone screaming," I replied. He stood up quickly and we walked into the waiting room together, listening carefully. After a minute, he turned to me. "I didn't hear anything, Dan," he said, his tone softening with concern. "Are you okay? You've seemed off lately." To his credit, my boss genuinely seemed worried. He was, without a doubt, the best manager we'd ever had, someone who always took care of his staff. "If you need time off, just let me know," he offered. "You've got plenty of leave saved up." I hesitated, then answered, "I don't know. I'll let you know." I turned away and headed for the elevators. The unease that had been lingering returned, this time stronger and harder to shake. What on earth was happening to me? What was I seeing, hearing? And what could I possibly do about it? Had everything unfolded at once, I might have walked away from the job, found somewhere else to be. But for reasons I couldn't fully explain, I decided to stay and see if things improved. The benefit of hindsight, right? Unfortunately, things only escalated from there. I began to feel chills as I moved through certain parts of the office, or even while sitting at my desk. I put in a request for the air conditioning to be inspected, but everything came back normal. The lights above my desk would flicker from time to time, no matter how many bulbs maintenance replaced. And at the edge of my vision, I'd catch glimpses of shapes moving in the shadows, but when I turned to look directly, they were gone. Physically and mentally, I started to unravel. I was jumpy, exhausted, and losing weight, and my colleagues started noticing. I wasn't sleeping well. My nights were filled with disturbing dreams of shadowy figures shifting in the dark, just out of reach. At home, I had to leave the lights on when I tried to sleep, terrified of what might happen if I woke up in total darkness. As I weakened under the stress and fear, it felt like whatever was haunting me grew stronger. It became more tangible, more real. I began to notice more details in the shadows. Long, dark strands of hair, for example. Nothing definitive enough to describe, but enough to make my skin crawl. On several occasions, I felt cold fingers brush my shoulder, but when I turned, no one was there. I nearly quit multiple times. Looking back, I can't understand why I didn't just walk away. Maybe it was out of some misguided sense of pride. I wanted to prove that I was tougher than whatever was tormenting me, or at the very least, I wanted to figure out why it was targeting me and nobody else. The others had no issues and couldn't understand my discomfort about being alone at work. I did try to investigate the building's history, but I found nothing. No dark secrets, no tragic events. Absolutely nothing that would explain what was happening. It made no sense. But everything was about to reach its breaking point as Christmas approached. One of the office traditions was the annual team photo. Every year, we'd dress up in our best clothes, get the photo taken by a professional, and then have it enlarged and displayed in the office. This year, though, something was different. The photo didn't get hung up. The day passed as usual. We had the picture taken, the photographer left, and we got back to our tasks. But then, a week later, I came into the office to find the whole team gathered around my boss's desk, looking at something. As I entered, they all turned to look at me simultaneously. I could tell something was wrong. Some faces were confused, some were puzzled, and more than a few looked fearful. Without a word, they all dispersed to their desks, and my boss motioned for me to come over. On his desk was an A3 size photo, the team photo. He gestured for me to take a look. Naturally, I searched for myself in the group. I'd been seated at the front, so it was easy to find me. But when I did, a cold wave washed over me. "What the hell is this?" my boss asked, his voice shaky. While everyone else in the photo appeared perfectly normal, smiling brightly, my face looked almost unrecognizable. At the time the photo had been taken, I'd been smiling just like everyone else, but in the picture, it was as if my face had been warped, distorted, stretched out, as if viewed through a fishbowl. I stared in pain, my mouth stretched unnaturally wide, my eyes wild with terror. But that wasn't the worst part. There was something standing behind me. To the casual observer, it was nothing more than a dark shape, indistinct and featureless, but its presence loomed over me, menacing and full of malice. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise as I gazed at the photo. I didn't have an explanation. Maybe something was wrong with the camera lens, I thought. I considered telling my boss the truth, that there was something after me, but I quickly dismissed the idea. No one would believe it, and I didn't want to be labeled as the crazy guy at work. Besides, I wasn't entirely sure that I wasn't already that guy. The photo was discarded, and the next day, I was reassigned to a different part of the office, the banking room. It was a secure, windowless room that required swipe card access. Once inside, the doors would lock magnetically, and the only way to get out was to push a button on the wall. My boss thought a break from the counter would help, and he'd arranged for counseling services for me. An hour or so into my shift, I felt a coldness settle over the room. I glanced at the thermostat. It hadn't changed. Then the lights began to flicker back and forth, on and off. I turned in my chair looking for a cause, but found nothing. As I turned back toward the desk, I froze. The dark shape was now sitting on the desk. I recoiled in horror, pushing my chair back as far as I could, but the small room left me with no place to escape. I collided with the shelves lining the wall behind me and tumbled to the floor. For the first time, I could make out details in the darkness. The figure solidified, appearing clearly for a split second with each flicker of the lights, only to fade when the lights returned. The shape was a girl, or at least something resembling one. She could have been anywhere between 16 and 50. Crouched on the desk, her knees near her head, her long hair hung down over her face. She appeared to be looking past me, but then, slowly, ever so slowly, her head turned toward me. Her eyes, oh God, her eyes, they were completely black, yet in different shades, allowing me to distinguish where the whites, the iris, and the pupils should have been. Those eyes were filled with madness, hatred, and hunger. The kind of hunger that's driven by something just out of reach. A tear slipped down my cheek as I stared into this horrifying sight, my body trembling with fear as the lights flickered again. The figure seemed to grow more solid, more real, as if feeding off the darkness and my fear. Her grin spread slowly, hungrily, across her face, impossibly wide, as her eyes grew even more crazed, vicious, and larger. Then she opened her mouth, revealing long, sharp teeth. She seemed to be trying to speak, but all that escaped her throat was a low, dangerous growl, a sound like nails on a chalkboard. I tried to call out, but nothing came from my throat. Nothing except a pathetic, terrified whimper. I didn't dare take my eyes off her nightmarish face as I struggled to get to my feet. I couldn't look away, fearing that if I did, she would be upon me in an instant. I knew how quickly she could move in the darkness. Staying as close to the wall as I could, I backed away slowly, ever so slowly, toward the door. Her eyes followed me, cocking her head slightly as if trying to figure out my next move. When I reached the door, I fumbled behind me for the button that would release the magnetic lock, hoping it would set me free from the suffocating room. My hand hit the light switch, and the room plunged into complete darkness. I froze, feeling hot, wet, rancid breath on the back of my neck. The air smelled like death, decay, corruption, and a burning, aching hunger that now seemed to belong to me. A voice rasped in my ear. Mine now. Pain shot through my body, and I found the ability to scream, though I don't remember much after that. I'm grateful for that, at least. My colleagues heard my screams and came running. They found me in the corner, flailing and covered in blood, gibbering madly. An ambulance was called, and I was sedated and taken to the hospital. Doctors believed I had a psychotic break and had hurt myself. After all, who else could have done it? There was no one else in the room when they found me. I tried to explain that the bites didn't match my teeth and that there was no blood or skin under my nails, but they didn't listen. The wounds eventually healed and turned into scars. My boss, being the good person he is, arranged for me to work in a different part of the department. In a new, well-lit building, I kept in touch with some former colleagues, though some of them now viewed me as a freak. Understandably, I suppose. Since that day, I've never allowed myself to be in the dark without some form of light. I usually stay in brightly lit rooms or outside in the sunshine. She can't reach me in the light, and even though she's powerful, she's not strong enough to fully emerge from the darkness. I believe she wants to catch me, and if she does, if she manages to finish me off, then maybe she'll gain enough strength to step into the light. So, you see, it's not the dark that scares me. Not at all. It's what hides in the dark, watching and waiting. That's what terrifies me. I think she's from somewhere beyond, from a place beyond the darkness, and was trying to make her way from there to here. Somehow, I think I let her in.